When I interviewed Cameron Tonkinwise, I thought it could be great to have him as a co-pilot for interviews. This is our first attempt. It might be that at some point we do it again. We will see. We wanted to interview on the topic of design education. Recently, I have published a long series, and the whole list now has nearly 150 episodes. Wow, 150. Sometimes I surprise myself when I see how much work we have done. In this episode, we interviewed two design educators, Martín Tironi and Marcos Chilet, that work together in the Catholic University in Chile. We talk in this interview on a network of planetary design and on the integration of terrestrial conditions in design practice. Martín and Marcos are problematizing the notion of a project as something very fixed, patriarcal, and human-centric. They propose that we should be working in the interconnectedness with the ecological, cultural, and political dimensions in which design is involved. My name is Mariana Salgado. This is Diseño y Diáspora.
I am Martín Tironi. I am currently the director of the School of Design of Pontificia Universidad Católica of Chile. And also I am the director of the Nucleus Millennius. It's a project that tries to address the effect of AI from an interdisciplinary perspective. And my main lines of research are design anthropology and the effect of digital technology in our social life.
Perfect. I guess you will tell us more about Nucleus Millennius afterwards, right? Yes, because Marcos, do you want to go?
Yes, of course. Well, first, thank you very much for the invitation. It's not my first time in this podcast, so I'm very glad to be back. Well, my name is Marcos Chilet. I'm a designer. I'm also vice director of the School of Design here at Chile with Martín. We work together. And in terms of research, now I also belong to the Nucleus Millennius as an investigator dealing with the problem of AI and image video making. And that is currently my main topic of concern, well, apart of education in design and the topics that are bringing us together.
So what exactly are you researching? What is your concern with AI and image video making?
Yeah, my concern is about like this idea of AI creating meaning, which is something that is super controversial in terms of what it's really doing. I'm very fond of an article from Mercedes Bunz that talks about this idea of the calculation of meaning. So in terms when we do art or music or design or architecture, well, Walter Benjamin talked about this idea of the aura, no? The aura of the work. I think there's some analogies in terms of rethinking art, design, and architecture in times of AI.
And what type of experiments are you doing?
Recently, with Martín, we did an exhibition. In Spanish is Devastaciones Generativas. I guess in English is something like generative devastations, where we basically play around with several topics. One of them is the material consequences of AI in terms of minerals, energy, very much in line with Kate Crawford's kind of line of thinking. And in another way, it's also about this contradiction, about something being two things at the same time, being something that is generative and completely devastador. I don't know if there's a word for that in English. Devastation, like. And basically, we did a video installation using a Runway Gen 3, which is like a video platform, and we start exploring like that experience. We can send you some images, of course.
Martín, would you like to add something to that?
Yes, actually, one of my project that I am doing now is to trying to criticize this imaginary of dematerialization of AI. So as several authors and Marcos has said, as Kate Crawford, exists this vision of AI as a disembodied forces, like a dimension that is separate from any relationship with terrestrial process. So in my research, I am trying to think AI as a network of interdependency in which the function of this technology depend on human work, infrastructure, imaginaries, but also from multi-natural resources. So one of my recent project was with Marcos, we try to create this friction between to generate image with AI, like speculative image that we took from picture of different natural resources that we use to create AI. But in the same time, we try to show this devastation scenario that AI can create if we continue to use natural resources for produce AI. So in a way, what we are trying to do is to create a terrestrial approach to AI, to seek to go beyond this dualism between technology and environment, and trying to visualize other way of thinking or other way of making technological innovation, but taking attention to how we can coexist with other ecosystem or with the earth.
And I wanted to ask, because we wanted to have this discussion in relation to design education. So how do you use this exhibition? I mean, how your students take part, or how do you use it in your education endeavors? Because you are both educators.
Yeah, one of the things that we are trying to do as a director of the School of Design and with Marcos is to open the design culture to a planetary scale. So we are trying to promote, it's a very ambitious project, but we are trying to promote the Earth, the terrestrial dimension, as a new ontological articulator of design. As you know, much of the contemporary design practice has based in this frame that design should respond to user needs, assisting them through different user-friendly service. So what we are trying to do is to generate tools, or other way to say it, how we can integrate the planetary or terrestrial condition into design practice. And so we are trying to visualize different ways, different tools to respond to this question. And the exhibition that Marcos was saying is a way to visualize this terrestrial condition of design practices.
Another thing that I think it is important is to say that we did the exhibition in the middle of the school. So basically, we took a risk, right? If we failed, well, that would be a problem. It's like, oh, the director and the deputy director are failing with their exhibition. Happily, it did not fail. It went very well, and we are very proud of the outcome in terms of the actual experience of the exhibition. So it was very useful to take our students into the exhibition and show them, like, this is what we do, not just in a paper, which is fantastic, nothing against papers, but this is what we do in an actual experience that you can feel, and upon we can dialogue. And I also realized that a lot of other professors use our installation as an excuse to talk about their own topics. I understand that that's maybe just the first step. Hopefully, we can do exhibitions in very complex levels with our students, of course. But this exhibition was not happening like in a museum in the middle of Santiago. It was happening in the middle of our faculty, our school.
And I understand also that this type of planetary discussion is also part of a network that you are creating with other universities. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, in fact, in Cumulus conference in Monterrey, we present this emerging network that we are creating called Planetary Design. So this network arises from the observation that modern design has been founded from an invisibility of other kind of users. And so the question that we are trying to address is how design can bring these new users or new problems in the core of design problem. And so we invite in this roundtable that we organize in Cumulus Conference, we invite Renata Leitao, that actually Cameron present us. Renata Leitao from Cornell University, she comes to the roundtable, and Juan Montalban. And so in this roundtable, we discuss different approach, different way to create more capacity to address non-human entities that are crucial to address ecological crisis, and also the eruption of AI. So this network is created by the School of Design, Catholic University, Tec de Monterrey, UANDES Colombia, and next year we are planning to organize what we call Commitment Santiago 2025, and the idea is to invite different people, researchers, professionals of design and architecture to think how we can bring the Earth as a new articulator of design practices.
Why do you have a network only with the private universities and not with the public ones in Latin America?
That's institutional politics, you know. Hard questions. Okay. No, we actually visited UNAM in Mexico. So we really think that hopefully, and we extended an invitation, and we also are talking with other universities, right? We really hope, for example, to extend an invitation to UBA. That's something important to us. And we also have universities here in Chile which are public. But we really need to understand also, and that's something that it's completely transparent, is that different universities, being public or private, have institutional relations that shift in a way. And that's something that we need to deal with. So sometimes you take the path with less friction to start the project, but that does not mean that while you're doing it, you can go beyond those institutional boundaries and actually invite a much more interesting group of universities. So it's not that we do not want to, it's that we are just starting. So we're starting where it's easier for our institutions to have a conversation.
I wanted to ask something conceptual about that. So I was not in the meeting, and perhaps this came up, but I'm interested to know if you are feeling that this planetary designing with more than human needs and with others, is this in addition to the type of designing, or is this a completely different designing? Or is this a different designing that will also deal with human needs? Do you understand it as a much larger framework that will accomplish what modern designing did and more? Or is it completely different? I don't know if those options make sense to you.
We are trying to be very diplomatic in the way that we are trying to put forward this framework, because when we are talking about planetary design, it's not mean that we think that human problems or human needs must to be forgotten. And one of the first operations that we are trying to propose is to terrestrialize design. That means to try to go beyond this deterritorialized project of moderns. And one of the main inspiration, actually, to be very transparent, is the notion of the French philosopher Baptiste Morisot. So we are not thinking in an isolated way. We are thinking with people from Europe. And Baptiste Morisot, he addressed this argument in which he said that the ecological crisis is a crisis of sensibility. And for us, this is a central argument because we are living in a decline of our ability to recognize or to establish a meaningful connection with other entity of the world. We need to create new capacity, but also new tools, new design to be able to create a capacity to be able to be with others. And so I think that in the core of design, this capacity to be able to be with others is always in the center of design. But now the challenge is how to expand this capacity and to develop the capacity to pay attention. I think that this is very important capacity to pay attention to other entities and create this diplomatic mode of action that involves to really understand and to pay attention to mode of being, to mode of thinking. So I don't know if I really answered your question, Cameron, but I think that this is a completely collaborative way of thinking, and our work is inspired by different sources.
Yeah, hopefully we're not trying to promote a new plugin for modernist design in terms of yes. Now you have this kind of design and you can add on, but we also don't want to say, oh, this is the way you should design, because I would see that we would be committing the same problem again, right? My interpretation of it is that the problem is like extreme interrelatedness. How you can actually address forms of extreme interrelatedness, where you actually, everything is connected with everything. We have a colleague, Pablo Hermasen, and he talks about the concept of maraña, which has a little bit of resonance with the idea of the rhizome in Deleuze, but it's not exactly the same. So it's different. And in a maraña, everything is connected in so many ways that you cannot actually move something without moving 1 million other things. And in a way, planetary design at the same time brings the concern about, okay, sustainability, so on and so on, but also this idea of extreme interconnectedness. And in a way, for our students and for our project as a school, this form of thinking in terms of being sensible, as Martín said, of the extreme interconnectedness of our actions, it's a way we want our students to understand their own ethics of project, but also an heuristics in terms of taking decisions. We still don't know if this actually is going to work. But what we are certain is the idea that what we were doing yesterday is not working anymore. And the last thing is that we cannot forget that in Chile, most of these processes of dialogue and conversation came from a process of social uprising. The School of Design started this shift to something different because we have a problem when our students 5 years ago confronted a very difficult social situation, and they ask their professors, ourselves, what design has to do. And that's a very radical question. And I think trying to answer that question for 5 years, and we're still trying to answer that question.
Yeah, actually, other way to answer your question, Cameron, is that many people ask me if this planetary design is linked to decolonial perspective. And actually, we can say yes, in fact, there is a lot of relation with what you or Escobar has worked. But actually, I think that this planetary perspective helps us to critically think about certain categories or notions that are assumed in a very normalized or very not criticalized way. And I think that we need to problematize, like category as a users, the category of needs, or even the category of project, or even the notion of design. I think must to be problematized. And so in my case, for instance, I don't feel like a decolonial research, because in my case, I did my PhD in Europe. So I don't speak the language of local indigenous community, but I completely support the necessity to problematize a lot of notions that come from this modern narrative that we heritage.
I wonder if I can put it a little more pragmatically. So those were beautiful answers. We have all, so as you just indicated, Martin, we have all been educated in design in a modernist, somewhat rationalist, perhaps Eurocentric way. And now, being older, we are deconstructing that, recognizing its limits and constraints, and doing projects like planetary design in order to find other ways of proceeding. So we are all, as teachers and researchers of a particular age, already doing this sort of double movement. We know the one and we're trying to get to the other. The question I kind of have is, a student arriving at a university now, should they encounter planetary design from the beginning, what will become of them? Will they be a designer? However, I also just want to recognize that you've indicated a different problem or solution, which is that the students are already coming with a different disposition. So even if you just taught what we've always taught for the last 100 years, it would not be learned in the same way because the students are different. But I just want to go back to this other question of, is it always going to be necessary to quickly reproduce our own educations in order to help the students see the limits and then explore planetary? Or can they start with planetary? And what would that entail, and what would it become?
It's not an easy answer. We really don't know, because as you said, we are doing this double process of having like a tradition in which we learn what design is, and we are simultaneously trying to teach that design is something more or something else. And I think it's quite challenging. I think we do not have option not to act, just for the reason that you explained, because students are different and they have different questions and they have different concerns. And even because I'm also part of the School of Design in terms of development, I do have a lot of touch with our former students that now are in the professional world. And also I'm starting to see that companies are requiring from them things that are different. So it's something that it's very clear that we need to change. Like in terms of the people that are seeking for a job, something as simple as that, seeking for a job as designer, either in the state or in the private sector, they are changing because those sectors are changing. And in the same way, those students that are coming into the school, they are changing. Now we are trying to move forward to this idea of extreme interrelatedness through this reconceptualization of the planet as a main design concern. Are we doing it from the start? No. And that's not because we don't want to, it's just because we live in an institution that has a larger faculty. Let me assure you that the faculty teaches what they want to teach. So it's not that we have this super consolidated project and everybody's super aligned. No, not at all. So in a way, maybe that's super healthy in a way, right? Maybe that's super healthy in terms that we have teachers that are teaching design in the most traditional sense, and some other that they are not. And in the middle, the students start finding their own path, right? And I think in a way, and this is in a way when they arrive to the last semesters of their own formation, they start to understand, oh, maybe I have an opinion about this because I had this experience with this teacher, another experience with this other teacher, I had this experience in this laboratory, and maybe I can choose a way of being a designer. So I wouldn't try to present what we are saying as a monolithical project, but we still don't know what this is. I'm quoting Spinoza here, right? Like, we still don't know what a body can do. We still don't know what design can do.
Actually, yeah, maybe what we are trying to do is to problematize the same notion of project. We heritage this notion of project, the project of design, that normally as something very fixed, very patriarchal, very human-centric. And so maybe what we are trying to do is to move away from this definition of project and try instead to move to a more provisional way to understand the notion of project, something that privileges a space of fragility, a space of questioning, a space of thinking with other way of thinking. So this is why maybe instead of talking about project, we must think about the project, something that is not fixed, something that is not finished, but is a verb, is designing or redesigning, is an open process of becoming with. And I said that because this planetary design, we don't know what it's going to be, but at least to create a listening space or diplomacy horizon to try to coexist in a better way with the problem of our planet.
One last thing that I think is super funny. We were meeting with, because we're doing some project, and we have a friend that it is an architect, and he was dealing, we need to think architecture from the point of view of bacteria. And we need to think about the point of view of planet. So at one point, it was a little bit ridiculous in terms that architecture now wants to think about their problems in terms of bacteria, like super small entities. And we designers, we want to think in terms of spatial design or terrestrial design. So and usually in our faculty, we have a faculty of urbanism and design and architecture. So usually it's this idea that, okay, we deal with different scales of the problem, like urban scale, housing scale, and our devices and interfaces around us. But it was super interesting to see that these kind of definitions that are very modern, they're not making any sense in terms of the things that actually the faculty and students are aware of, and are taking into consideration to create their own perspectives.
This episode is part of the list Educación and Diseño, D&D in English, Chile y Diseño. The list titles are in Spanish, but within each list you can also find episodes in English and Portuguese. I have previously interviewed Martín and Marcos in Spanish to talk about the research and design projects. Marcos is in a panel talking about the design of the Chilean constitution in episode 184, and in episode 249 we talked about his work in the public sector and the contribution of design to politics. Martín was interviewed in episode 225, and in this interview we talked about prototypes to understand new forms of relations with chimpanzees. Design educators interviewed their research with their classes. In previous interviews with them, the focus was in their research and not in their roles as shaping the design curricula in the university. Let's now continue listening to Martín and Marcos, that they have a much more to tell. You talk about the project, so should all this learning happens through the studios type of thing, or how this learning happen? What are the modes of the learning that you are proposing around, right? Like the focus is different, but it's also the modes of learning different.
Yeah. So first of all, I think that the capacity of observation is still very, very, very important. I believe designers must develop this ability to observe. That I think is not easy. We normally use this notion of observation, but to really to understand other way of being in the world needs to develop this skill to understanding the world from the point of view of the entity that experiences it. I think the other thing that we are trying to promote is to understand the interdependencies that make up the things and the entity that inhabit the world. I believe that designers need to have a framework or a mindset of interdependencies, and to do so, they need to be able to navigate in this complex network of relationship that come from ecological or geological dimension. This is and the other thing that for us is very important as a skill to learn design, or I don't know if it's really a design skill or maybe it's another kind of skill, is to recognize that when we design, we are mobilizing different scales. So I really like this notion that Andrés Jaque, that last week was in our school, this notion that he used is trans-scale dimension. That so how we are moving all the time in different scale, and this capacity to pay attention to this geological, technological, cultural, political dimension in which design are always involved.
Just to add that this is a super open discussion in terms of inside the school, there are different point of views. Even in Cumulus, we went to Cumulus in Mexico last week. And for example, Don Norman said in his keynote, como, no planetary design, like very explicit. And it was interesting in a way to see that we are dealing, and everybody's dealing in some way or form with this idea of design, this design that it's not actually what we've been teaching for the last 20 years.
Can I ask, designers, in the way Martin described it, often learn by observing through project. So if we go back to artificial intelligence, you kind of just introduce them to the systems, they subscribe to one, and then they start playing with it. And a good designer can observe and reverse engineer some mental model of how this thing is working, and can even begin to disrupt it and hack it and make it do things it wasn't intended to do. And so one can imagine it's possible to teach designers to be trans-scale by getting them to play at lots of different levels. However, if you're talking about from bacteria to planet, there are too many levels to learn that way. And at some point, you need to just learn about. So I thought this was Mariana's question. You know, you can learn through studio and project, but at some point it might be necessary to just have a seminar or just, you know, kind of say, look, there's this and this and this and this. Don't play with that. But in order to be trans-scale, we have to teach you a lot, and you have to know a lot, and you have to get to that space without having to do it all for yourself. So it's kind of the question I'm having right now. If you're going to teach artificial intelligence, how much do you have to say to the designers, look, I have to teach you something about the history of computing. I have to teach you something about taxonomies and library science and meta tagging. I need to teach you something about large language models. I need to teach you something about, you know, these transformers that are allowing ChatGPT to be generative. Then you can play. So I'm sort of constantly wondering with these questions of everything is connected and trans-scale, like how much do we need to teach, and how much do we need to teach explicitly, and how much can we let them play and discover? Now, there's no answer to this. It's just it's a general question. I'm kind of interested in your experience more than if you have an in-principle answer.
Yeah, I think we have different techniques, I think methods and approach. I think if you ask different professors, probably they will give you different answers. I can give you mine, but maybe it's like a super mistake and I'm doing everything wrong, but I can give you what I'm doing. Once I heard the definition of being a neurotic, according to a friend of mine, and maybe it's not a good definition, but this is the one that my friend gave me, is that you are sitting in an airplane and suddenly you realize that this airplane has 1,000,000 parts and cables, and any one of those cables can fail. And maybe if this cable fails, the plane goes down. And then the neurotic really cannot forget all the complexity in order to sleep in a plane. And then he needs to take 2 glasses of whiskey in order to forget the fact that he's flying in the middle of the earth, like surrounded by complexity, that is hidden in a way. For me, that's the problem. For me, the problem is not the limit of what can you teach. I think when you have good students, you really can teach them a lot, right? Really, and if they're enthusiastic, I'm always amazed and surprised by the amount of curiosity someone in their 20s can have, and they have time too, and they have internet, and they have a lot of tools in order to. My problem is when you know so much. You never know so much in terms of the total knowledge of, but when you can know so much in terms of this trans-scaling, that a little bit more knowledge starts paralyzing you. And you're becoming like unable to deal with the connections of all that information. And for me, is almost a balance that it's always in relation to this. For example, I don't teach in groups. I don't make groups for my students to actually develop their projects. That's not because I don't believe in group projects. That is because in the way that I teach, I need to understand every one of my students in order of their process of not becoming a neurotic and not being able to sleep in the plane, or not being relaxed in terms of doing something with the knowledge that they have. But that's my approach. I see it in a more psychological way.
Just to add something, I completely agree with what you were saying, Cameron. I think that it's necessary to problematize the very idea of intervention or the idea of project or design. I think that to have a good intervention or to have a good design, it's necessary to have a good theory. But at the same time, to have a good theory, we need good practices. I think our is a dialectic relationship. It's a continuous relation between theory and hands-on project. And I think that one of the things that is maybe in crisis is our ability to rethink our way of designing the planet. I think that, as Deleuze was saying, the planet become a project of human wills, and we need to. So this is why I think it's very important that design culture or hand-on project need to connect with other discipline, to other way of thinking, to try to create this trans-scale thinking or planetary thinking about the capacity of design to world making. I think that this is.
So are you really going to do some kind of exercises that go beyond your faculty? Because I think if we are going to talk about planetary design, and then we are not going to design with the ecologists and the physicists and the meteorological people, I mean, then what are we talking about?
Completely. We are doing that. For example, we recently hired 2 tenure track positions, which the Institute of Sustainable Development, and Martín is a sociologist, and we are having faculty that is actually coming from everywhere in the university. So yeah, we understand exactly what you said, Mariana. We understand.
But what I mean is not having like faculty members with a different background doing design, but also doing, I mean, creative hubs or things in which we can really create new things together with other people from other disciplines.
Absolutely. I don't know if we're going to be successful, but in terms of concrete institutional decisions, and we are in the direction so we can make some of those decisions become true. We're trying to create at least those hubs. We have some successes in terms of something that we have done in the past, and we are trying to have more successes. But that's super interesting because that involves not only an intellectual discussion, involves the way that designers and design school can take a different position inside a very complex university as is the Catholic University of Chile, which is in Chilean terms very big and very complex. But we do have an understanding of design changing, as Martín said in the beginning, its diplomatic role inside the university, and hopefully with other universities, hopefully some of them public, and hopefully going beyond this into the private sector, because most of our students work in the private sector. Most of our students are not academics.
Just to give you, Mariana, an example, we are working with a colleague, Manuela Garreton, in a project called Hybrid Ecology, in which we are trying to visualize the different ecosystems that support the AI system. So we work with geologists, but also with
hydraulic engineer.
Yeah, try to reveal to the terrestrial interdependencies of this AI need to functioning. So we did an exhibition in which you see the exactly quantity of water that you need to produce one image with a stable diffusion. So when you enter to the room of the exhibition, you start to use AI system, and in the same moment that the public are using AI, you see in the center of the room the 32 millimeter of water that you need to produce this image of AI. So through this gesture, we are trying to make invisible this form of human and more than human interdependency that you need to produce AI system. So this is kind of project that we are doing that need different skills, different disciplines.
In terms of context, I think that something important to say is that we are in a curricular change, meaning we are changing. This is not just like a philosophical approach in terms of what we want to do, but it's also impacting directly like the courses and the structure of the degree in a very deep way. And most of these ideas that Martín is explaining are becoming concrete in terms of actual changes in the way we name the courses and the structure of the courses. For example, 5 years ago, we have a workshop course, a main workshop course that it was called Market Number 1. Then we have another that's called Market Number 2. And now we have future scenarios and interdisciplinary practices. So we change market number 1 for future scenarios and market number 2 for interdisciplinary practices. I'm not going to give you more examples, but that's a shift, you know?
That definitely. And what about the going beyond the project? How these can be seen in the curriculum?
Well, Martín teaches critical design, that that's not going beyond the project, but it's going beyond the project as we understand what a project is. That's fascinating. We have, for example, we had a student that went in a very Foucault kind of way, and she said, you know, I am the project, myself is the project. So basically, she did a lot of shifts upon her body and the way she wanted to live in some form of self-design. And that was super interesting because it became an issue for lecturers and teachers. How is this valid? How we can actually evaluate this? Can we give her a degree and the other thing is that it was super well done, you know? It was very, very well done. Because if it was badly done, then no problem. That's okay, badly done, bad project. We don't have to worry about this. But suddenly we confronted a project that was extraordinarily well done.
And what type of changes this student did in her body?
No, well, she transitioned, gender transition, and she used her transition as a project, as a design project. And that was quite challenging.
It's so important because, you know, the most popular subject, apparently, for a long time at Stanford University has been this course called Design Your Life. And, you know, so this was the moment at which you were using design thinking Post-it notes to kind of ideate, you know, what you might do. And it's such a sad and pathetic version of design. So to hear of a project in which somebody is taking the phrase design your life and actually taking it to a kind of, you know, Sloterdijk level of cosmotechnically restructuring their being in the world, that's what that phrase design your life should mean. So it's very exciting to hear somebody doing that and not just somebody, you know, cobbling together a career pivot. It's so much more interesting.
No, yeah. And then some other things become part of the design repertoire in terms of tools, hormones, for example, dialogues. And that's one case. We really have a lot of cases that's an example when I was saying students are challenging us into new categories of understanding design. We can be reactive to that. We can be trying to understand that. But it is happening all around us. And we are trying to deal with this in these terms. Maybe some other future director will deal it in other terms. But what we are completely sure is that we need this deep thinking.
Martín and Marcos propose that we need to understand the interdependencies that inhabit the world. Designers need to have a framework for interdependencies and move beyond the limits of project work. They are thinking on how to connect critical design with the hands-on work that designers do. This is also in line with how we interview in this podcast. We always want to have concrete cases that helps us to understand the theoretical framework behind. But also, we want to go deep into understanding the thinking of a group of designers or a designer. We want to give more visibility to design research and try the podcast as a tool for research. Also, we want to motivate designers that are not students anymore to follow the work of academics in design. Maybe it's a little bit too ambitious. Next episode, we start a series on creativity with 6 episodes. This is the second series I produced on the same topic. This time with interviews from France, Spain, Colombia, Chile, and Mexico. We are looking for geographical diversity always. And after this one, we will have a long series of 10 episodes on the colonial design. This time it will be a trilingual series with episodes in Portuguese, Spanish, and English. This series on the colonial design is funded by the Design Research Society. Stay tuned. As always, the music of this podcast is by Antonio Zimmerman, sound design is by Julián Pereira. This podcast is published with Creative Commons license with attributions. This was Diseño y Diáspora. You can follow us on our social media channels in YouTube, Instagram, and Blue Sky, or visit our website. Remember to recommend us and recommend our books. By the way, did you notice that we published our second book on health and design? All our publications are online and free from our website. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.